It's 7 p.m. Friday, July 19th here in Seoul.
Coming up on NEWSCENTER tonight. South Korea's presidential office says it was Japan who breached international law by slamming export restrictions against Seoul. It also rejects Tokyo's claim that Seoul is violating a 1965 treaty on historical disputes.
Japan's foreign minister summons Korea's ambassador after Seoul dismissed Tokyo's request to have a third party arbitrate the historical disputes. Seoul's Nam Kwan-pyo calls for a diplomatic solution, saying Japan's unilateral measures are shaking the core of bilateral relations.
North Korea's total trade with other countries plummets as international sanctions continue to take their toll. The figure fell by almost half in 2018 compared to the previous year.
And one of the most beloved summer festivals in Korea, the Boryeong Mud Festival, is back with many concerts and other events lined up. NEWSCENTER begins now.
Good evening and welcome to Arirang NEWSCENTER. Live from Seoul, I'm Han-daeun.
And I'm Noah. Thank you for joining us this evening. We begin with Typhoon Danas, making its way upward and inching closer to the Korean peninsula as we speak. Danas is expected to reach Korea's southernmost island of Jeju early tomorrow morning and make landfall in the coastal areas of Jeollado province.
Heavy rain and strong winds are already battering the southern regions, triggering flight cancellations and damaging structures and buildings. For more details, let's turn to our Michelle Park at the Weather Center. Michelle.
Well, Typhoon Danas is expected to remain a tropical storm, making its way into the coast of Jeollado province by early tomorrow morning and cross right through the southern provinces before exiting out and dissipating in the East Sea on Sunday morning. Now, Jeju Island and the southern coastal areas are already receiving a substantial amount of monsoon rain, but Typhoon Danas is expected to make a direct influence, dumping even more precipitation starting this night, with some areas expected to receive as much as 700 millimeters of rain. Now, heavy rain alerts are issued across these regions, so please stay extra careful on the roads for possible floods and also landslides. Back to you.
Korea-Japan tensions are showing no signs of letting up. Seoul's presidential office says Tokyo is in serious violation of WTO principles and international trade norms. The Blue House also said Korea will review whether to keep its military information sharing agreement with Japan. Our Shin Se-min with the details.
Presidential National Security Advisor Kim Hyun-jong says Tokyo is clearly violating the WTO principles of free trade and international law through its unilateral export curbs, and once again called on Japan to retract the measures. Regarding top Japanese diplomat Taro Kono's remarks that Seoul is not abiding by a 1965 bilateral treaty, the top aide said such claims are incorrect.
We would like to emphasize that it was Japan which violated international law by committing crimes against humanity in the form of forced labor. This is what the Supreme Court of Korea pointed out.
Kim said South Korea had followed all standard procedures to resolve the issue of forced labor with Japan through regular diplomatic channels. The top aide also flatly rejected Japan's proposal for a third-party arbitration process, for which it has set a July 18th deadline for Seoul to respond.
Japan has been repeatedly calling for resolution through arbitration in accordance with the claims settlement agreement, but we have never agreed to a deadline that Japan has set arbitrarily and unilaterally.
Korea's presidential office said it hopes to extend the General Security of Military Information Agreement with Japan for the time being. But it noted that the deal will be objectively scrutinized both qualitatively and quantitatively in terms of the information the two sides have exchanged to see how helpful it is to Seoul. In other words, the bilateral military information sharing accord will be dealt separately from Japan's economic retaliations. With the long-fraught relations between Seoul and Tokyo on trade only escalating by the day, a high-ranking official here at the top office added that such a dispute could extend into the long term, perhaps even after Japan's upper house elections next week. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
South Korea's trade ministry has refuted Japan's claim that its export curbs on high-tech materials to South Korea are merely part of its export management system. Here's a trade ministry official this morning.
Due to the restrictions, Japanese companies are unable to ship their products to South Korea, and Korean companies are now looking elsewhere to properly manage the global supply chain. If this situation continues, it will negatively impact the global supply chain and consumers around the world. Japan isn't fooling anyone by saying its action is not a restriction, considering the strength of Tokyo's move exceeds the level of any country's export management.
The official also said that Seoul has always assigned a sufficient number of personnel and has strictly managed its own export controls to North Korea and called for the two sides to return to the previous status quo without the restrictions. He added that Seoul wants in-depth discussions with Tokyo on the issue, urging it to respond to South Korea's request for high-level talks. South Korea's ambassador to Japan has been summoned to Tokyo's foreign ministry as Korea has not accepted Japan's unilateral call for an arbitration on the issue of wartime forced labor. There, Ambassador Nam Kwan-pyo urged Japan to turn to diplomacy to resolve the matter. Our Park Hee-jun has the details.
Japanese Foreign Minister Taro Kono has summoned the South Korean ambassador to Japan, Nam Kwan-pyo, after the South Korean government failed to respond to Japan's call for third country arbitration to settle the forced labor disputes. Japan had set a midnight deadline for Korea to accept, made in response to Seoul's Supreme Court decision ordering Japanese companies to compensate the victims. Ambassador Nam was summoned to Tokyo's foreign ministry Friday to hear Japan's complaints. Minister Kono expressed deep disappointment in the South Korean government and called on Korea to correct the situation, which he called an unacceptable violation of international law.
South Korea cannot ignore this violation of international law, and I strongly urge it to take corrective measures immediately.
Nam, however, turned that around, saying it's Japan's unilateral measures that are hurting bilateral relations, pointing out that the people and businesses of both countries are suffering the consequences. He emphasized the need for a quick resolution through dialogue.
As part of such efforts, the South Korean government has delivered its plan to Japan. I hope both sides will be able to discuss a better solution based on this.
Japan's discontent was evident in Kono's harsh remarks and the fact that he interrupted while Nam was speaking. Afterwards, the Japanese foreign minister released a statement calling the Supreme Court's rulings deeply regrettable and absolutely unacceptable. He hinted at the possibility of additional retaliatory measures and said there will be a new set of actions in light of the escalated tensions between Seoul and Tokyo. The 1965 bilateral agreement between the two countries states that an arbitration panel can be set up within 30 days after either side's request. But it cannot be done if one side objects. South Korea's top office has repeatedly shown reluctance to agree to mediation, saying the dispute should be settled through bilateral discussions. The Blue House and the Foreign Ministry have also expressed regret over the summoning of South Korea's diplomats. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
The Economist magazine strongly criticized Japan's latest export curbs against South Korea, calling it a dangerous and reckless move that has, quote, Trumpian echoes. A Japanese expert also criticized his own country's decision, saying that Japan is only hurting itself. Our Kim Mo-gyun has this report.
Britain's weekly magazine The Economist said the trade dispute between Seoul and Tokyo has Trumpian echoes with the potential to be as damaging as Washington's trade dispute with Europe and China. In an online post on Friday, the magazine drew parallels between Japan's latest export restrictions to South Korea and U.S. President Donald Trump's economic strategies, claiming Trump's model of abusing economic partners is spreading. The magazine said Japan's measures are self-harming as well as economically short-sighted and reckless. Saying that Korean companies are the most dominant memory chip manufacturers in the world, it said Japan's export restrictions would deal a big blow to the global supply chain. However, it stressed that it's not too late for the two countries to settle the dispute, while the economic fallout remains limited. Meanwhile, a Japanese expert also seems to be on the same line. In an article published at EE Times Japan, Takashi Yunogami, a semiconductor engineer turned consultant and an author on Japan's semiconductor industry, says Japan is digging its own grave with the latest export curbs. He said that by restricting exports of key chemical materials to South Korea, Japan has already done irreparable harm to the global electronics industry at a price that is both incalculable and unnecessary. Yunogami also added that if global South Korean firms such as Samsung Electronics, SK Hynix, and LG Display reduce their usage of materials from Japan and find local replacements, Japan will have to face the damages, and that the eventual backlash will hit Japan and undercut its competitiveness. Kim Mo-kyan, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, South Korean firms are exploring all possible means to prepare for Japan possibly expanding its export restrictions as Samsung Electronics is stockpiling Japanese materials. Our Kim Da-mi with more.
Samsung Electronics has asked its partner companies in Korea to stock up on Japanese components used in making consumer electronics and smartphones. The tech giant reportedly told them to get as much as they can by August 15, promising to take complete responsibility if they end up with leftovers. Samsung has earlier expressed a concern over the high likelihood that Japan will take South Korea off of its so-called white list of trading partners. Analysts note that Samsung's openness about such plans signal that it's taking the situation extremely seriously. Meanwhile, the vice chairman of Hyundai Motors, Jung Hee-sun, has been in Japan since Thursday. Hyundai said Jung is there to attend the pre-Olympics for archery in Tokyo, but industry watchers think his trip is not totally irrelevant to Japan's export curbs. Although 90% of Hyundai's vehicle components are made in Korea, the vice chairman might be looking for hydrogen fuel tanks for some models. In addition to stocking up on supplies and visiting Japan, Korean firms are speeding up efforts to have their materials made locally. LG Display is in fact reportedly ready to test the production of its own etching gas, one of the three materials targeted by Japan's export curbs. Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix are also in the process of testing and developing that and other materials now sourced from China and Taiwan. As Tokyo dials up the economic pressure, South Korean firms are doing all they can do to get ready to stand on their own. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
More and more consumers here in South Korea are boycotting Japanese-made products in protest of Tokyo's latest export curbs, and their protests are showing no signs of abating. Our Seo Eun-kyung tells us more.
The ongoing boycott movement in Korea against Japanese products has impacted a whole swath of different industries. Japanese beer sales has tumbled in convenience stores nationwide. According to CU, the largest convenience store chain in Korea, sales of Japanese beers such as Asahi, Kirin, and Sapporo plunged more than 40% on year over the first 18 days of July. Sales fell 10% during the first week of the month, but it widened to 40% by the third week, indicating that more and more Korean customers are joining the boycott. During this period, total beer sales rose 1.2%, while consumption of imported beer, excluding Japanese brand, climbed 1.9%. The boycott has impacted the tourism industry. The number of South Korean visitors to Japan fell 3.8% on year in the first half of the year, the first decline in 5 years. The Japanese daily Sankei Shimbun said Japan could struggle to reach its goal of 40 million foreign visitors next year, and that's despite the 2020 Tokyo Olympics being held. Against this backdrop, the number of Koreans who are participating in the boycott is on a steady rise. According to a local pollster, 48% of the respondents said they will boycott Japanese-made products in a survey conducted on July 10th. The same poll conducted a week later showed the figure had increased to 54.6%. A website called Nono Japan was launched earlier this month by an ordinary Korean citizen, which informs users about Japanese brands and Japanese-made products. And it also makes recommendations for Korean-made substitutes of the listed products. With no end in sight to the ongoing trade spat between South Korea and Japan, the boycott may persist for the time being. 서은경, Arirang News.
Now, amid all this, South Korea's Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi says he's considering allowing extended working hours outside the 52-hour maximum workweek system. He says this is in order for local companies affected by Japan's export restrictions to spend more time developing materials used to manufacture semiconductors. The remarks came in a meeting earlier today with relevant ministries to discuss countermeasures to Japan's export curbs. Other measures include shortening the time for licensing on chemical substances and seeking financial support for the affected companies. The ministers also checked on the aftermath that could arise if Seoul is excluded from Tokyo's export whitelist. The US reportedly wants South Korea and Japan to extend a 3-year agreement between the neighboring countries that allows their militaries to share information. The deal is due for renew but remains in limbo amid the strained Seoul-Tokyo relations. Our Kim Ji-yeon with more.
Seoul's defense ministry said Friday that in principle it will maintain the General Security and Military Information Agreement, or JSOMIA, a deal it signed with Tokyo to share military information. While revoking it would be a drastic step, the ministry said it's contemplating an array of issues, including the agreement's effectiveness. Following JSOMIA, which was signed in November of 2016, a ministry official said Japan has provided Seoul with data gathered by Japan's satellites regarding North Korea's nuclear weapons and missiles. Meanwhile, of the 3 levels of South Korean military's classified information system, Seoul has been disclosing levels 2 and 3 to Japan. The U.S. State Department has reportedly said it fully supports South Korea and Japan extending their JSOMIA. According to Voice of America, an official at the State Department spokesperson's office said by email that JSOMIA is an important part of achieving the final fully verified denuclearization of North Korea, as well as maintaining peace and prosperity in Asia. The State Department also said that JSOMIA shows the maturity of South Korea and Japan's security relationship and helps their joint efforts with the U.S. on denuclearization. But speculations are rising that South Korea could review whether to renew JSOMIA or let it expire. South Korean opposition lawmaker Sim Sang-jung with the Minor Justice Party quoted National Security Advisor Chung Eui-yong following Thursday's meeting between President Moon Jae-in and the leaders of the main 5 political parties that the government has a position to maintain JSOMIA, but that it can be reconsidered in accordance with relevant circumstances. If Seoul does not want to extend the bilateral agreement, it has to notify Tokyo by August 24th. Otherwise, it will be automatically extended for another year. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
President Moon Jae-in says he feels responsible for concerns over a lack of discipline in the country's military, adding he is responding sternly. His remarks are believed to be in reference to recent incidents, including a North Korean boat drifting undetected in South Korean waters. Here he is speaking earlier today at a Blue House luncheon with elders from the military reserves.
최근 벌어진 몇 가지 일로 우리 군의 기강과 또 경계 태세에 대해서 국민들께서 우려를 하고 있습니다. 국군 통수권자로서 책임을 느끼며 국방부 장관과 또 합참 의장을 중심으로 엄중하게 대응해 나가고 있다는 말씀을 드립니다.
The president also stressed that the South Korea-US alliance is vital to peace in the region. He added the alliance will be stronger the better South Korea can defend itself. And in that regard, the government is pushing for the early transfer of wartime operational control from the US. Moon also pledged to acquire cutting-edge surveillance and long-distance strike capabilities. Also highlighting last month's meeting between Kim Jong-un and President Trump at the DMZ, President Moon vowed to take a leading role in the 3 countries' efforts to establish peace on the Korean peninsula. Recent data from South Korea's trade agency shows that North Korea's 2018 trade volume plummeted down to half compared to the year before, largely because of international sanctions. Pyongyang is seeking to earn money by hosting tours for foreigners. Oh Jung-hee reports.
International sanctions are clearly taking a toll on North Korea's economy, slashing its trade down to half. According to Korea Trade Investment Promotion Agency's report on Friday, Pyongyang's trade volume in 2018 shrank by a whopping 49% compared to the previous year. Down for 2 consecutive years, the volume stood at $2.8 billion, recording below $3 billion for the first time since Kim Jong-un assumed power in 2012. North Korea's exports dropped by 86% and imports by 31%. The report cited 3 UN sanctions resolutions in place since 2017. North Korea's exports of coal, iron, and clothes are banned, while the regime is not allowed to import industrial machines and equipment. Because of these sanctions, the North became even more dependent on China for trade, up to 96%. But their bilateral trade shrank by over 48% last year as well, which was another critical hit for the regime's overall trade. As the North Korean economy faces a downturn and international sanctions remain solidly in place, Pyongyang is turning its eyes to tour programs for a source of income. North Korea's tour website, DPR Korea Tour, introduced sightseeing programs to Baekdusan Mountain and cities like Pyongyang and Kaesong for foreigners. The website also announced that a marathon event will take place in late September. Earlier this month, the North promoted tours to Kumgangsan Mountain and golf, bicycle, and ski tours for people from China, Russia, Switzerland, and Germany. 오정희, Arirang News.
Now, coming back to Typhoon Danas, dozens of flights were cancelled at Jeju International Airport earlier today as the typhoon nears the Korean peninsula. As of 4:30 p.m., 46 flights have been cancelled and more than 150 have been delayed due to harsh weather conditions. The 5th typhoon of the season is expected to reach Jeju's coast in the coming hours. South Koreans were recently shocked and outraged by a video online of a Korean man beating his Vietnamese wife. It's put the spotlight on ways for women who move to this country for marriage to get help when they need it in their native language, especially in emergencies. Oh Soo-young has more.
South Korea is ramping up support for 130,000 migrant women who have moved to the country for marriage, to help them overcome cultural and social barriers as well as handle emergencies. If a migrant woman faces violence or domestic abuse but cannot communicate with the police, she can contact the Tanuri helpline. The hotline is open every day around the clock and offers help in 13 languages. The government plans to increase the number of offline support centres to 5 by the end of the year. 28 emergency shelters are also available through the hotline or at offline agencies. Women can get protection and emotional therapy for up to 2 years. Local organisations in Seoul and Daegu also offer emergency support and to help women start rebuilding their lives. They also offer interpretation, information about job opportunities, job training, as well as legal advice.
We aim to help migrant women settle in Korea and learn about their human rights. We do this by providing information about Korea, legal information, and so on. We hope they will also help other migrant women.
Migrant women have also formed their own communities to help each other become more socially active, learn Korean, and develop friendships. A woman from Mongolia, who is Korea's first politician of foreign descent, founded a community called Tamo.
We get together to learn the Korean language together, organize cultural activities to share our diverse cultures with Koreans, and these days we're focusing on diverse job opportunities.
Local governments are working with communities like these to help migrant women develop professional skill sets for quality jobs.
While most migrant women in Korea tend to take on a simple work like cleaning or working at restaurants, Seongnam City is offering training in medical tourism so they can turn their native language skills into a specialized profession in interpretation.
We're learning about the medical tourism industry and special terminologies, then we'll start practical training. It's a great career opportunity to help people from our countries who visit Korea for medical treatment.
Observers say more programs like these are needed to help migrant women settle in and contribute their unique skills to Korean society. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
One of Korea's most beloved summer festivals, the Boryeong Mud Festival, is back for its 22nd installment. Our Lee Min-sun was there.
From head to toe, it's time to get all muddy to beat the summer heat. It's the only place you can throw mud at a stranger and still have fun together. The 22nd Boryeong Mud Festival, one of the most beloved summer festivals in Korea, kicked off on Friday on Daecheon Beach in Chungcheongnam-do Province. This year's festival features some 70 different programs, including K-pop concerts and a mud beauty festival.
Everything mud-related is on offer at this festival. It's got mud slide, mud wrestling, and even a mud flame marathon, a taste of endurance unlike any other.
At giant mud pools, visitors can get completely soaked in mud waters and enjoy swimming and splashing. If you want to experience something more wild, you can challenge yourself by participating at a mud run, Mud Monster Championship to cross over 10 obstacles. This year, the Mud Experience Zone will open at night for the first time, extending its hours of operation to 9 p.m. The Boryeong Mud Festival started off in 1998 as a local festival to promote the region's mud, which is well known for its rich minerals that provides health benefits and is good for the skin. The event is now recognized as an international festival, drawing visitors from around the world for its unique theme of mud.
We are from Russia, we are dance team, and we enjoy this festival. We love the mud and play in this place, and we like music and atmosphere. It's very cool for us.
This is my first time at Boryeong Mud Festival. I'm having a really good time. It's fun. The most fun part I had so far was the wrestling. Oh yeah? Yeah, the mud wrestling. We wrestle each other. Yeah, I won.
Last year, 1.8 million people came to the festival, and 16% of them, or some 290,000, were foreigners. This year's Boryeong Mud Festival will run until July 28th, so there's plenty of time left to get your own mud experience and create some unforgettable memories. Lee Min-sun, Arirang News, Boryeong.
Saturday marks the 50th anniversary of the historic Apollo 11 moon landing. Now, in the 21st century, South Korea is making great strides toward becoming a space power. Our Choi Si-young met with a few experts to find out more.
A launch vehicle is a rocket-propelled vehicle that can carry payloads such as satellites into space. Building an indigenous space vehicle is considered to be the first and most daunting task to become a true space power. South Korea is only one step away from realizing that ambition, having successfully test-launched an indigenous rocket engine last year, which will power the Korea Space Launch Vehicle 2, or NEWSCENTER, scheduled for launch in 2021.
The successful trial run is meaningful in the sense that we can now put into orbit any working satellite at any time of our choosing, and all this on our soil.
The expert went on to say that the country's space division has even more ambitions.
In addition to launching the NEWSCENTER in 2021, we're working on a project to send a moon orbiter.
Last year, South Korea also put into orbit a cutting-edge weather satellite called Cheolyan-2A that transmits high-resolution photos of weather phone developments and the earthly surface to local researchers every 10 minutes. By next year, South Korea is also planning to launch the weather satellite Cheolyan-2B, a twin of the Cheolyan-2A launched last year, which became fully operational this July.
Cheolyan-2B will monitor in real time fine dust levels in the air above the country and keep track of temperature changes on the surface of adjacent seas.
The expert also detailed the agency's plan to launch what it calls Compact Advanced Satellite 500 by next year, a next-generation satellite with a wide range of different applications.
The new satellite will measure soil fertility in farmlands and gauge the health of forests in the country. It will also help draw a three-dimensional map of the country, which newer industries can take advantage of.
The agency plans to help a local space company to take the lead in developing satellites by transferring technology and providing technical consultations. Choi Si-young, Arirang News.
To celebrate the 50th anniversary of the historic Apollo 11 moon landing, NASA has released for the first time a YouTube video showing scientists checking samples brought from the moon for any sign of life. In a statement explaining the video, a biologist said they had to be careful to avoid contaminating these samples, such as lunar rocks, soil and dust. So they had to sterilize every tool used in the process. After several months of testing, the research ended with no life found. South Korea's producer prices fell in June for the first time in 5 months, mainly because of cheaper oil and farm products. That could mean lower prices for consumers down the road. According to the Bank of Korea, the producer price index edged down 0.3% in June from the month before. The BOK attributed the fall to a drop in the prices of petroleum and coal products. Korea's benchmark Dubai crude was down by 11%. A record crop of onions has been produced in Korea, despite a drop in farmland that grows the vegetable. So far this year, nearly 1.6 million tons of onions have been produced, the largest amount since records began. The figure is a near 5% rise from last year. Onion prices have also plummeted recently, causing concern for farmers. The finance ministers of the Group of 7 countries say they've agreed in principle to tax tech giants such as Google and Facebook on their offshore income. In a meeting near Paris on Thursday, the ministers reached a consensus on what they called a minimum level of effective taxation the tech giants should pay. However, an actual rate was not decided. France hailed that agreement, but the US stressed that more work needs to be done. That has been your 3-minute news flash.
Typhoon Danas is expected to influence the nation with heavy downpours tonight through tomorrow before exiting out, dissipating into the East Sea on Sunday morning. Now, Jeju Island and the southern coastal areas are already receiving a heavy amount of monsoon rain, but Typhoon Danas is expected to dump even more precipitation starting this night, with some areas expected to receive as much as 700 millimeters of rain. And strong wind alerts are also likely to be in the forecast. The weekend is also going to be a wet one for Beijing and also for Tokyo, with temperatures expected to stay within the average ranges. Now, speaking of which, let's have a look at our readings for tomorrow. The nation can expect a warmer start to our day, mostly waking up to at least 23 degrees Celsius. Now, heat waves are relieved by the rain. Seoul and Chuncheon will mark up to 30 degrees Celsius into the afternoon, while the southern regions are a few notches cooler. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
That will do it for this edition of Arirang News. Thank you, as always, for watching.
News in Depth is next.